I've told this story maybe 40 times now. And every single time when I get to the part where the officer raised his weapon at the guard, somebody stops me. Every time. They hold up a hand and they say, "No, Maddie, no, that didn't happen." A police officer pointing a gun at a royal guard, in daylight, on a Tuesday, with 300 people standing right there filming it on their phones. And I just let them finish. I've learned to let them finish. Then I tell them I was 11 feet away. I tell them I had a paper cup of coffee in my right hand and that I dropped it, and here's the thing, I never heard it hit the ground. Not once. In all these years, my memory has never given me that sound back. There's a gap where it should be. Just silence and a man in a black bearskin standing very, very still while another man screamed at him to move. So let me start at the beginning, because the beginning was so ordinary it almost hurts to think about now. My name's Maddie Crow. I run a coffee cart. Not a van, not a shop, a cart. 2 wheels, a fold-out awning, a boiler that took me 4 years to pay off. I set up at the Thornwick Gate on the eastern edge of the park in Havern, and I'd been doing it for 11 years by that autumn. Same corner, same 12 paving stones. I knew which one wobbled. If you've never been to Havern, the Thornwick Gate is the one all the photos are taken at. Big iron thing, black and gold, and behind it the long gravel avenue that runs up through the green toward the palace. There's a sentry box on either side of the gate. Painted, I want to say, a kind of deep charcoal, though the paint always looked greener in the rain. And in each box, a man from the Sable Guard. Tourists came for the guard. Nobody came for my coffee. That's fine. I'm not sensitive about it. I always said the guard was the best business partner I ever had, and he never once asked for a cut. The Sable Guard aren't the ones you're picturing, probably. They're not the parade lot with the silver breastplates. That's the household horse they do the ceremonial rides. The Sable are the ones who actually stand there, all day. Black tunic, black bearskin, white belt, rifle at the shoulder. And they do not move. That's the whole job in the public's mind. Standing there while a Norwegian teenager tries to make you laugh. But it isn't the whole job. I want to be clear about that because it matters for what comes later. They're soldiers, real ones. That rifle isn't a prop. Every one of those men had been somewhere hot and unpleasant before they got the honor of standing in the cold being poked at. And the ones I got to know, sort of know, the way you know someone you can't talk to, they carried it. You could see it around their eyes. They looked at the crowd the way a lifeguard looks at water. The one at the north box that autumn was a lance corporal called Sim Bracken. I didn't learn his name until much later. For 2 years he was just the tall one in my head, and then later, the one who blinks. Because he did blink, that was the thing. Some of them go glassy, they find a spot on the horizon and they're gone, they're somewhere else entirely for 2 hours. Bracken never went anywhere. His eyes worked the crowd. Left, right, back, slow, like he was reading it. He was maybe 30. Long face, bit of a broken nose, the kind of jaw that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and then apologized for. Not handsome. And under that bearskin, honestly, none of them are handsome, they're just tall. Here's the only thing I knew about him before that day, and it's a small thing. There was a girl, little girl, maybe 6, 7. She used to come with her grandfather on Thursdays. I remember because Thursdays my slow morning and I noticed things on Thursdays. She had a red coat and one of those toy soldier drums on a strap, and she'd stand in front of Bracken's box and drum at him. Terrible drumming. Absolutely no rhythm. Her grandfather would go pink and try to drag her off, and she'd plant her feet like a donkey. And Bracken never reacted, not once, not a flicker. And I only caught this because I'm standing there 11 hours a day with nothing to look at. Every time she left, when she was walking away up the path with her granddad, holding his hand, back turned. Bracken's eyes would follow her. Just to the corner, then back to the crowd. That's it, that's the whole thing. That was Sim Bracken to me before that Tuesday. A man who checked that a child got to the corner safely and then went back to work. I think about that more than I should. The day itself. October the 12th, I think, though I've stopped trusting my own dates on this. Cold morning, the first properly cold one, where you can see your own breath and everyone's suddenly wearing a scarf they've dug out of somewhere and forgotten they owned. Sky the color of an old bedsheet. No rain, but that heavy gray where it feels like the rain's just waiting for you to relax. The green was full of leaves. They hadn't swept yet. That's a small thing, but it stayed with me. Everything that morning had leaves on it. Every photograph afterwards has leaves in it. I got there at 6, boiler on at 10 past. First customer at 20 past, a woman called Priya who worked at the ministry building on the corner and got a flat white every single working day for 6 years and never once had it right, according to her. She said it was too hot. It was always too hot. I think it was a bit she did. She said something to me that morning. She said, "You'd think they'd cancel it in this cold." The ride, she meant the ride. Because it was a ceremonial day. There was a foreign delegation in. I genuinely could not tell you which country, and I've never looked it up. Isn't that strange? It's the one detail I've never bothered to check. But there was a delegation, and that meant the household horse would do the escort ride, down the long avenue through the green, past the bandstand, out through the Thornwick gate and up toward the palace. That's why there was a crowd. That's why there were 300 people instead of 40. They started gathering around 7:30. The good spots go first, the ones along the railing where you can get the horses and the gate in the same shot. Families, loads of school kids, there must have been a trip in, all in matching yellow high-vis vests with a teacher counting them over and over like she didn't trust the number. I remember the noise. That's what nobody puts in the news reports. The noise of a crowd waiting for something is very specific. It's not loud. It's this low churn, hundreds of little conversations, and someone's laughing too much. And there's a baby somewhere doing that not crying yet whinge, and a bloke's playing music off his phone speaker badly. And under it all, the horses. You could hear them before you saw them. That's a sound I still can't be around, honestly. Iron on gravel. At about 9, a man came to my cart. I want to be careful here. I've had police ask me about this, and journalists, and a man writing a book, and every single one of them wanted me to say I noticed something. That I got a feeling. That the hairs went up on my arms. I didn't, there was no feeling. I want to be honest about that because I think the lies people tell about these things are worse than useless. They make you think you'd spot it. You wouldn't, I didn't, nobody did. He was a bloke in his 40s. Gray jacket, dark trousers, a rucksack, a completely normal rucksack, the kind with a water bottle pocket on the side, and there was a water bottle in it. He ordered a tea, not coffee. Tea, milk, no sugar. He paid in coins, exact change. Counted it out on the little tray I keep on the corner, and I remember thinking, that's nice, that's helpful, because I was always short on coins by lunch. And he said something about the weather. He said, "Bit sharp today." Bit sharp today. He drank about half of it. I saw him walking off up the path toward the bandstand with the cup in his hand, and then he was just a bloke in a crowd, and I served the next person, and that's it. That's the last thing I know about him with my own eyes. He was 31. I found that out later. He'd worked in a hardware distribution warehouse for 9 years. He had a mother in a care home who was still alive when it happened, and as far as I know, never fully understood what she'd been told. I've never known what to do with the fact that he said "bit sharp today." It's such a nothing sentence. It's what you say. And he said it while carrying what he was carrying, and I handed him his change, and I said, "Warm you up," or something like that. I said something friendly. The horses came through at 17 minutes past 9. That part I do know exactly, because the palace timing is exact. And afterwards everybody's phone footage got lined up on a timeline, second by second. And I've seen that timeline more times than I'd like. I'd stopped serving. You always stop serving for the ride, no point. Nobody's looking at you, and honestly, I liked watching it. 11 years and I still liked watching it. There's something in it. The way they come down that avenue with the leaves everywhere and the breath coming off the horses in the cold. The crowd went quiet in that way crowds do, not silent, just down a level. And the drums started up at the bandstand. There was a band that day, a small one, doing the ceremonial thing. Brass and drums. This old marching tune that everyone in Havern knows and nobody knows the name of. Bracken was in the north box. I glanced at him. I've tried to work out why I glanced at him, and I think the truth is boring. I glanced at him because I always glanced at him. Habit. 11 years of glancing at whoever was in that box. He was watching the crowd, not the horses. Everyone in that park was watching the horses except him because that wasn't his job. I want you to hold on to that. The blast was at 9:22. I'm going to describe this the way it happened to me and not the way it looks in the footage, because those are two completely different events, and I only lived one of them. It didn't sound like an explosion. That's the first thing. In films, it's a big rolling boom and you know exactly what it is. It wasn't like that. It was flat and enormously loud and close. That's the only word. It was close in a way sound normally isn't. It felt like something had happened inside my head rather than 150 meters away. Like someone had slammed a door in a room I was standing in. And then the air moved. Not wind, wind pushes. This was more like the air just stopped being where it had been. My awning went. Cups went. The whole cart came up onto one wheel and I got a boiler full of hot water down my leg and I didn't feel it. I want to be clear, I did not feel it. I had a burn that took 4 months to sort out and I did not feel one single thing at the time. I was on the ground, I don't know how. I don't remember deciding to go there or falling. And then nothing, silence. Total silence for what I would swear was 10 seconds and was probably 1.5. My ears had just checked out. There were people all around me on the ground and standing and running, and every one of them had their mouth open, and there was no sound at all. Then it came back, and I have spent 20 years trying not to describe what it sounded like when it came back, so I'll just say this. It came back all at once, and it wasn't screaming at first. It was car alarms. Every car on the Eastern Road went off at the same second, and that's what I heard first, this enormous stupid chorus of car alarms, and then the people. There was a smoke column over the bandstand. Black at the bottom, going gray and wide as it went up, and it was already tilting eastward in the wind, and there was, I'm sorry, but there was paper in the air. Leaves and paper and something white and light floating down everywhere for a long time. Programs from the band, I think. It kept falling for minutes. And the horses. God, the horses. Look, I'm not going to do this bit properly. I'm not. There were people that day who had far worse than I had, and I'm not going to sit here and perform it. But the horses got out. That's the thing about horses. They go, and they don't go in a line, and a crowd of 300 people all trying to get out of one gate, and a group of panicking animals trying to get in the other direction is. 9 people died at the bandstand. 2 more later in the hospital, 60-something injured. I found that out from a screen in a room days after. Here's the part where the story becomes about Bracken. I got up. I don't know why I got up. Standing was the stupidest available option, but I got up and I turned toward the gate because the gate was the way out, and everyone was going that way. And I saw the sentry boxes. The south box was empty. I want to say that clearly because a lot of nonsense got said about that man afterwards and it wasn't fair. The south sentry had gone forward, toward the bandstand, toward it, not away, a 19-year-old kid. He'd been in that box for 11 days, and when the world came apart, he went at it. He pulled 2 people out. He was in the papers briefly, and then he wasn't because the story became about the other box. Because the north box was not empty. Bracken was still in it. Rifle at the shoulder, feet together, bearskin dead level, in that exact position. With half the park on fire behind me and paper falling out of the sky and a woman about 6 feet from me screaming for her son, Bracken was standing at his post like it was 9 o'clock on a Sunday and nothing in the world had ever happened. And my first reaction, I'm ashamed of this and I'll say it anyway, my first reaction was fury. Absolute hot, disgusted fury. I thought, you coward. I thought, look at you, look at your stupid hat, your stupid toy rifle. People are dying and you're doing your little statue act because that's all you're for. I actually shouted at him. I don't know what I shouted. Something. I shouted at a man in a burning park because he wasn't running, and I have carried that for 20 years, and I'm going to tell you why in part 3. And when I do, I'd ask you to remember that I was the first person that day to get him completely, catastrophically wrong. I wasn't the last. The next 20 minutes were chaos, and I only have pieces. Sirens quick, they were quick. There's a station 4 streets off. A helicopter low, so low the noise flattened everything. People pushing at the gate, and the gate being the wrong width, and someone in a high-vis vest trying to get the school children into a line against the railing, because a line felt like a plan. I ended up back at my cart because I didn't know where else to be, ripped the awning off, got the burner off, and started handing out water. That was my contribution to the worst day in the history of my city. I handed out bottled water for 20 minutes. Some bloke tried to pay me. I remember that. He tried to pay me and I couldn't make him understand that it was free now, that everything was free now, and he kept holding the note out. And through all of it, every time I looked left, Bracken was in that box. He didn't move. People noticed. Oh, people noticed. It started as a mutter and became a proper thing, and there were phones out, of course there were phones out, and I heard a bloke behind me say, loudly for an audience, "Look at that. Look at that. That's this country, that is." And a woman was crying at him. At Bracken. Right up at the box, screaming at him about her daughter, asking him where the ambulances were, asking why he wouldn't answer her, and he looked straight through her. Eyes on the crowd, left, right, back. And she called him something I won't repeat, and then she hit the box with her open hand and went away. Bracken did not blink. No, that's wrong. He did blink. He blinked, and his eyes kept working the crowd, and it was only much later, watching the footage frame by frame with a man from the inquiry sat next to me, that I understood what those eyes were doing. He wasn't standing there. He was looking for something. At 9:51, a police officer came through the Thornwick gate at a run. He had a weapon in his hand. He came right past me, close enough that his sleeve caught the edge of my cart and knocked a stack of cups over. And he went straight at Bracken's box, and he brought that weapon up in both hands and leveled it at the chest of a man of the Sable Guard. And he screamed at him to open the gate. And behind me, 300 people stopped screaming and turned around. I've said 11 feet this whole time like it's a fact. It isn't. It's a measurement a man from the inquiry gave me 3 years later off a diagram. He put his finger on a little cross on a piece of paper and said, "That's you, Mr. Crow." And I looked at this cross on this drawing of the worst morning of my life, and I thought, well, there I am. 11 feet from the officer, 19 from Bracken. That's the geometry of it. What it felt like was about 2 feet. It felt like it was happening on my chest. Let me describe him, the officer, because everyone always wants him described, and nobody ever likes the description. He was ordinary. Late 30s, stocky, going soft round the middle of the way blokes that age do. Black uniform, the vest, the belt with all the clutter on it, the radio on the shoulder. Short hair, gone gray at the sides. Red in the face, but everyone was red in the face. We'd all been running or crying or both. He looked like a policeman. He looked exactly like a policeman. That's the whole problem, and I'll come back to it, but I need you to understand that when he came through that gate, I felt relief. Real, physical relief in my stomach. I thought, thank God, it's starting, the proper people are here. Everybody thought that. You can hear it on the footage. There's a woman near the railing who actually says, "Oh, thank God," you can hear her, clear as anything, about a second before he raised the weapon. That's the part that's hard to explain to people now. We were all so pleased to see him. He went past me at a run, and his sleeve caught my cart and put a stack of cups over. Little sound, that. Paper cups going over. I remember it more clearly than the bomb. Then he was at the box, and he brought the weapon up in both hands, arms locked, and he put it on Bracken's chest from about 4 feet, and he screamed, "Open the gate." And the park stopped. I mean that. 300 people, sirens, alarms, a helicopter, and all of it just stopped in my head, went down to nothing, because a man was pointing a gun at a Royal Guard 19 feet from where I was standing, and my brain simply refused to file it. Bracken didn't move. Not a flicker, rifle at the shoulder, feet together, bearskin dead level. He was looking at the crowd past the officer over his shoulder at the crowd, and I swear to you his eyes were still doing that same slow sweep. Left, right, back. The officer screamed it again, "Open this gate now." And Bracken looked at him. Only then, only when it was the second time. He dropped his eyes off the crowd and onto this man, and he looked at him, and it was the flattest look I have ever seen on a human face. Not scared, not angry. Nothing you could put a name on. It was the look you give a fridge you're deciding whether to buy. Then his eyes went back up, back to the crowd, left, right, back. Now, you have to understand what that gate was at that moment, or none of this makes any sense. The Thornwick gate is the pedestrian gate. It's a little one in the middle of the big one. The big one is for the horses, and it takes 2 men and a key and about 90 seconds. The little one's a bolt. And the little one was shut, and there were maybe 200 people stacked up against it, because the eastern crowd, my side, the gate side, had all run at the exit and found it closed. Why was it closed? Because it's always closed during the ride. It's closed for the horses. Nobody had opened it because the man whose job it was to open it in the south box was 140 meters away pulling a woman out from under a fallen railing, and God bless him for it. So there was a crowd crushed 3 deep screaming against a bolted gate. Children in it. I could see a kid's yellow high-vis vest pressed flat against the iron. And a police officer arrived and told a soldier to open it, and the soldier stood there like a lamppost. Do you see it? Do you see how it looked? Because from where every single person in that park was standing at 9:51 in the morning on the 12th of October, the situation was this. A policeman is begging a royal guard to save children, and the royal guard won't because a rule says he can't. That's the story. That's the story that went round the world by lunchtime. That's the story that was on the front of 4 newspapers the next morning under a photograph of Bracken's face. And I believed it too. I want that on the record. I stood there and I believed it with my whole chest. Here's what I did. I've had 20 years to dress this up, and I'm not going to. I shouted at Bracken. I'd already shouted at him once earlier when he wouldn't run. Now I shouted at him again, and this time I had a crowd behind me, and I want to be honest about what that does to a person, having a crowd behind you. It makes you brave in the worst possible way. It makes you loud. I shouted, "Open the gate, you." I'm not going to say the rest. I've never said the rest. Not to the inquiry, not to the man writing his book, not to my wife. I know exactly what I said. It's the last thing in my head every night before I go, some nights, 20 years on, a sentence I shouted at a man's back in a burning park. And the crowd took it up. That's the bit that still turns my stomach. It went round like a wave. People started chanting it, not the words I used, other words. Open the gate, open the gate. And they were banging on the railings, and somebody threw a shoe. A shoe. It bounced off the box. And a bloke near me, this big lad in a rugby top, he started climbing the railing to get at him. 2 of his mates pulled him down. If they hadn't, I think he'd have gone for Bracken with his hands, and I know that Bracken would have let him. Because Bracken never moved. 19 feet away, a gun on his chest, a crowd screaming for him, a shoe bouncing off his sentry box, and Sim Bracken stood there with his rifle at his shoulder, and his eyes going left, right, back. The officer changed tactics. He dropped the weapon, dropped his arms, not the weapon, and he came in close, right up under Bracken's face, and he stopped screaming and started pleading. And this was worse. This was so much worse to watch. He said, mate, there are kids in there, look at me, there are kids. And his voice went. It genuinely went, cracked in the middle of it, and I'll tell you something, I've watched that clip since, more times than is good for me, and it's still one of the best things I've ever seen a human being do. It's flawless. The crack in the voice is flawless. He said, I'm asking you as a man. He said, please. The crowd went quiet for that. You could hear him. That's why it's on every recording, everybody shut up to hear him beg. And Sim Bracken looked at the crowd. Left, right, back. I want to stop the story here for a minute, because if I don't, you're going to spend part 3 hating me, and I'd rather you hated me on the correct schedule. At the inquiry, they showed me the footage slowed down. 4 different phones synced. And the man sat next to me, quiet bloke, cardigan, ex-military, I think, though he never said, he said, Mr. Crow, I'm not going to tell you what to look at. I'd like you to watch his eyes and tell me where they go. So I watched. And I said, the crowd, he's looking at the crowd. And he said, which part of the crowd? And I said, all of it, he's sweeping it. And he said, watch again. So I watched again. And it took me, I'm not proud of this, it took me 11 passes. 11. Sat in a room with a screen and a man with all the time in the world. Bracken wasn't sweeping the crowd. He was checking 4 places. 4, the same 4 over and over in the same order for 19 minutes. Left, right, back, left, right, back. It looked like a sweep because it was fast and it was regular, and because I'm a bloke who sells coffee and not a bloke who's been trained. Those 4 things were the gate itself, the base of it where the ironwork meets the ground. The bin. There was a public bin about 6 meters from the box, one of those big galvanized ones with the flap. A gray rucksack on the ground by the railing, with a water bottle in the side pocket. Nobody standing near it. Nobody had been standing near it for 19 minutes. And the officer's boots. I'll come back to the boots. That one's part 3 and I'm not going to spoil it, and honestly I'm not sure I could do it justice out of order. But the rucksack, let's do the rucksack. The man in the gray jacket, tea, milk, no sugar, exact change, bit sharp today. He'd gone up toward the bandstand, and he'd left his rucksack by the railing 40 meters inside the gate, at about 9:10, and then he'd walked away from it, and then he'd done what he did at the bandstand at 9:22 with a second one. 2 devices. That was always the plan. That's what they do. It's not clever, it's not even original, it's the oldest and ugliest idea in the trade. You put one where the people are, and you put the other one where the people will run to. The gate, everybody runs to the gate. The first one goes off, and 300 terrified human beings do the most natural thing a human being can do, which is run for the exit, and stack themselves 3 deep against a bolt, right on top of the second one. And then somebody opens that gate and they all pour through and past that bin and past that rucksack. And that was the design. That was the whole design. The bandstand was the bait. Sim Bracken clocked the rucksack at 9:24. 2 minutes after the blast. They know that because his eyes go to it, on the footage, and stay there for 4 seconds, and 4 seconds is an eternity for a man whose eyes had been moving on a 2-second cycle for 11 months. 4 seconds, then back to work. And what did he have? He had a rifle. He had a radio he couldn't reach without breaking position and dropping his weapon in front of a panicking crowd. He had no idea whether the bag was a bomb or some poor woman's shopping. He had no idea whether the bin was clean. He had no authority to move a civilian crowd. And he had one single thing that he could do. He could stand in front of the gate. That's it, that's all he had. A big, loud, stupid black hat and a uniform and 200 years of a country's habits. And the fact that in Havern, on a Tuesday morning, there is no force on earth that will make a British crowd shove past a man of the Sable Guard. They'd scream at him, they'd throw a shoe at him, they'd call him a coward on the front of 4 newspapers. They wouldn't move him. He knew that. He knew that better than he knew his own name. He'd been standing in that box for 11 months learning exactly how much a crowd will and won't do, and he took the one weapon he had, which was the fact that everybody in that park was slightly frightened of him, and he pointed it at 200 people, and he held it there for 19 minutes while they hated him. Every second I was screaming at him, he was working. He held that gate shut with his face. I need to tell you the rest of part 2, though, because there's a bit I haven't got to, and it's the bit that turns. At about 9:56, the officer stopped pleading. He went very quiet. He looked at Bracken, and Bracken looked at the crowd, and then the officer did something that I didn't understand at the time and that I have never been able to unsee since. He looked over his shoulder. Not at the crowd, at the gate. He looked at the gate and then at the bin and then he looked back at Bracken. And he smiled. It was tiny. It was about a quarter of a second. It's on one recording out of the 41 they recovered. One, a lad's phone, wrong angle, half a face. And when they showed me that quarter second in that room, I had to leave and be sick in a corridor. Because it wasn't a nice smile. It wasn't relief or nerves or the mad thing that happens to people's faces in a crisis. It was the smile of a man checking his work. Then he raised the weapon again, properly up on the chest, and he put his other hand on the gate bolt himself. He was going to open it. He was standing there with a gun on a soldier and reaching for the bolt with his left hand. And 200 people were going to come through that gate in about 4 seconds, past a bin and a gray rucksack, and there was nothing on this earth that was going to stop it. And Sim Bracken spoke. You need to understand what that meant. They don't speak. That's not a rule someone made up for tourists. It's not a gimmick. On post at that gate in that uniform, a man of the Sable Guard does not speak to the public. Ever. He can challenge, and there's a form of words for that, and it hasn't changed in 140 years. Other than that, nothing. There are men who have stood 800 watches at that gate and never said one word at any of them. I'd stood 11 feet from that box, 11 hours a day for 11 years. I had never heard one of them speak. Not once, not ever, not a cough. And Sim Bracken, with a weapon on his chest, and a shoe on the ground by his boot, and me screaming filth at him, and a woman crying at him about her daughter, and his own name being turned into a swear word in real time on 300 phones. Sim Bracken looked at that police officer, and he said 7 words. The whole park heard it. It's on every recording, every single one, 41 out of 41, because it turns out the one sound that cuts through a helicopter and a crowd and 11 car alarms is a Royal Guard's voice when nobody has ever heard it before. He said them quite quietly, actually. That's what gets me. No shouting, just this low, flat, slightly hoarse voice, the voice of a bloke who hadn't used it since breakfast. 7 words. And the officer's hand came off the bolt. "Not police, take your hand away." That's it, that's the 7 words. I've watched people's faces when I say it. They always want more. They want a speech. They want the thing you'd get in a film, some line about duty or about the Queen or about not on my watch. And they get 7 flat words from a hoarse bloke who hadn't spoken since breakfast, and you can see the disappointment go across them like weather. But you weren't there. If you'd been there, you'd know that those 7 words landed on that park like a roof coming off. Here's what happened in the second afterwards, and I mean the actual second, because that's how it broke down at the inquiry. Second by second, 41 phones all synced. Nobody understood it. That's the first thing. It wasn't a gasp. It was 300 people going, "What?" Not out loud, just in their shoulders. You can see it on the wide shots. The whole crowd sort of tilts. Because we'd all spent 19 minutes screaming at a statue, and the statue had just talked, and the thing it said didn't fit into any of the shapes we had ready. "You're not police." I remember thinking, and this is genuinely what my brain produced in that moment, having been given the truth for free. I remember thinking, what's he on about? Course he's police. Look at him. That's what I thought. 19 minutes of hating a man for standing still, and my first instinct when he finally spoke was that he'd lost it. But the officer's hand came off the bolt. And that's when I knew. Because if you tell a real police officer he's not police, in the middle of a mass casualty event, with a bomb going off behind him and children crushed against a gate, do you know what a real police officer does? He carries on, he doesn't even hear you. He's got a job. This man's hand came off that bolt like the metal had gone hot. The boots. Everyone always wants the boots, and I'll give you the boots, but I want to say first that the boots are the least impressive part of this, and I'll explain why. They were work boots. Brown-soled, steel toe, the tan stitching visible under the black. The kind you get from a trade catalog for 60 quid. Absolutely bog-standard warehouse boots. The sort a man wears for 9 years in a hardware distribution depot, and then wears on the last morning of his life because he's got them on and they're comfortable, and honestly, at that point, who's looking at your feet? Nobody, that's the answer. Nobody is looking at your feet. Except one man in the whole of Havern, who had spent 11 months in a box learning 300 faces a day, and whose entire trade, his real trade, the one under the hat, was noticing. Now here's why the boots aren't the impressive part. The boots weren't the proof. Bracken didn't see brown stitching and go, aha, he'd never have moved on that alone. Blokes wear the wrong boots. Coppers off shift, coppers who have come off a rest day, all sorts. What he had was 4 things, and they only meant something together. The rucksack sat by the railing since 9:10, nobody near it. Bracken clocked it at 9:24 and never let go of it. The bin, flap shut. He'd watched the bin men do that bin at 6:30 and it should have been light, and at some point that morning it had stopped being light. You can't see that. But you can see how a man moves past a bin he's just put something heavy in, and Bracken had been watching that corner for 11 months. The boots. And the last one, which is the one that finishes me. The officer didn't look at the smoke. Not once. 19 minutes. There was a column of black smoke over the bandstand 140 meters away with 9 people dead under it, and every single human being in that park. Everyone, me, the crying woman, the rugby lad, the kid in the yellow vest. Every one of us kept looking at it. You couldn't not. Your head just went there, on its own, over and over, like a tongue at a broken tooth. He never looked at it once, because he already knew what was in it. He ran. He got about 4 steps. And this is the bit that nobody believes, so let me be very careful and very boring about it. Bracken did not tackle him. Bracken did not shoot him. Bracken did not do the thing that's in the film they made. And yes, they made a film, and no, I've never watched more than the first 20 minutes of it. And yes, I did have to sit in a room and tell a very polite young woman that a man of the Sable Guard did not karate chop anybody. And yes, they put it in anyway. What Bracken did was step out of the box. One pace, forward and left onto the path between that man and the gate, rifle still shouldered. He didn't even bring it down. He just stood in the way. And this bloke who had murdered 9 people 40 minutes earlier and was standing there with a live weapon in his hand, stopped. Dead, in front of him. I have thought about that more than I've thought about anything else in my life. He had a gun. Bracken had a rifle on his shoulder that wasn't even pointed. He could have shot him. It's a footpath. He could have gone round him. There's 4 feet of gravel either side. It's not a corridor, it's a park. He stopped. I don't know why. Nobody knows why. The inquiry has a paragraph about it, and the paragraph is rubbish. It's all psychological effect of uniform and authority display. And I've read it about 9 times, and it's a man in a cardigan trying to write down a thing he watched and didn't understand. I'll give you my version. It's not evidence. It's just what I think from 11 feet. I think he stopped because he'd spent 40 minutes being the most powerful man in that park. He'd walked in with a gun and a costume, and 300 people had thanked God for him. He'd had a soldier at gunpoint, and a whole city doing what he wanted. And then a bloke in a stupid hat said 7 words in a bored voice, and took it all off him at once. I think he stopped because he'd stopped being anybody. Then the rugby lad hit him. I'm not joking. I wish I had something more dignified, but the big lad in the rugby top, the one whose mates had pulled him off the railing 20 minutes earlier when he wanted to have a go at Bracken, came off that railing like a bag of cement and took him into the gravel. And then about 6 other people were on him, and it got very ugly very quickly, and I'm not going to pretend I did anything to stop it. I didn't. I stood there. I had a bottle of water in each hand, and I stood there and watched a crowd do what crowds do. It was Bracken who stopped it. He didn't shout. He put himself over the top of that man, over him, physically, standing across him, and he shouted one word, which was back, and it came out of him like a door slamming, and everybody went back. He'd known that man was going to kill 200 people. He'd known it for 27 minutes, and when the crowd got hold of him, Sim Bracken stood over him and kept him alive. That's the man. That's actually the man, not the 7 words that. The rest is procedure, and procedure is boring, and thank God for that. The armed response lot were through the gate at 10:03. They came from outside, from the Eastern Road, and they'd been held 4 minutes because, and this is the detail that I think should be carved somewhere, because they'd been told there might be a secondary at the pedestrian gate, and they weren't going to walk their own people onto it. They knew, the professionals knew. They had it from a bloke on a rooftop with binoculars who'd seen the rucksack sat there since 9:20. They knew, and they held. And 19 feet from that rucksack, a lance corporal with no radio and no orders had come to the same conclusion 2 minutes after the blast, on his own, with nothing but his eyes, and had solved it by standing still and letting his own country call him a coward for 19 minutes on live television. They cleared the crowd back through the western side. Took 40 minutes. Nobody through the Thornwick gate, not one person. Disposal did the rucksack at 11:40. Controlled explosion. You'd have heard it in the city center. I heard it from a bench 2 streets away with a foil blanket on me like a bad kebab, and my whole body went rigid, and a paramedic held my shoulder and said, "That's ours, love. That one's ours." It was real. Obviously it was real. It was bigger than the first one. The report says a figure, and the figure means nothing to me, but the man in the cardigan told me, off the record in a corridor, that if 200 people had come through that gate at 9:56. He didn't finish it. He just did a thing with his hand. Bracken went back in the box. I want to end this bit properly, so. At 10:09, with the man on the ground in handcuffs and the ARV team all over the gate and a helicopter 40 feet up, Lance Corporal Sim Bracken took 1 pace back into the North Sentry box, brought his rifle up to the shoulder, put his feet together and stood at his post. Because nobody had relieved him. He was there until 11:15. 2 hours. He'd been on since 6. They forgot him. There was a bombing and everything went sideways, and the paperwork of relieving a sentry did not get done, so he stood there in a park full of dead people and disposal robots until a very embarrassed sergeant came and got him. And in those 2 hours, the newspapers went to press. 4 front pages the next morning. His face huge in that hat, eyes forward, a still from the footage, the moment the woman was screaming at him about her daughter and he was looking through her. It's a horrible photograph. You couldn't design a more damning photograph. The headline on one of them was one word. I'm not going to type it. It took 9 days for the truth to come out, because the counter-terror lot wouldn't release the timeline while they were still pulling in the other two. And so for 9 days that man's family read that about him, and his mum was 71, and I've since been told what those 9 days were in that house. The apologies came. Oh, they came. Big ones on page 1 in enormous letters, and one of the editors resigned and went on television about it and cried a bit. 9 days. I never apologized. That's the end of the story, really, and everything after this is just me. I went back to the cart 11 days later, because what else was I going to do? And the gate was shut and the green was shut, and I sold about 4 coffees to police officers and journalists. And when they reopened it in the spring, there was a new lad in the north box, 19, terrified, and I gave him a nod every morning for 6 years. Bracken never came back to that gate. He didn't want the medal. Well, he took it. You don't get to not take it. But he wouldn't do the thing at the palace with the cameras, and there's a photo of him at some regimental do afterwards where he looks like a man being slowly murdered. He left the army about 2 years later. Never gave an interview. Not one. Every documentary about that day has the same 41 phone clips and a gap where he should be. And I looked for him, course I did. Everyone did. I did 4 interviews about it in the first year, and then I stopped. And I stopped because of what happened in the 4th one, which was that a journalist asked me, nicely, decent bloke. He wasn't fishing. He asked me what I'd shouted at him. And I lied. I said I couldn't remember. Sat there on the telly in front of God and everybody and said I couldn't remember. And the whole time it was sat in my mouth like a stone. The exact sentence, every syllable of it in my own voice. Then 8 years after that, they did the 10-year inquiry review, and they wanted witness statements, and I gave one, and at the end of it, I don't know why I hadn't planned it. My wife will tell you I hadn't planned it. I said it. Out loud, in a room, into a microphone, exactly what I shouted at that man's back while he was busy saving my life. There's a transcript. It's public. You can look it up. I went home, and I didn't get out of bed for 2 days. The letter came 11 years after that. Not to the house, to the cart. That's how I knew it was real, actually, before I opened it, because nobody writes to a coffee cart. There's no address. He'd put the coffee cart, Thornwick Gate, East Side, and the postcode of the ministry building over the road, and some absolute hero of a postman had walked it round and handed it to me in person while I was doing a flat white. Handwriting like a doctor's, cheap paper. It was 4 lines. I'm not going to give you all of it. I'm sorry. I know that's a rotten thing to do to you after all this, but there's 4 lines in the world that are mine, and I'd like to keep 2 of them. Here's what I'll give you. He said he'd read the transcript. He said, and this is close to word for word, I've got it in a drawer and I don't have to look, he said. You were doing what everyone was doing. I'd have shouted too. I'd rather be shouted at than write to your family. And then the last line, which was, you always made it too hot. I sat down on the curb. 11 years. 11 years of it, and the whole time, he'd been one of the flat whites. He'd been a bloke in a coat, off duty, out of the hat, in a queue, and I'd handed him a cup and taken his coins and said something like, warm you up, and he'd said thanks, and he'd walked off. I have absolutely no memory of it. None. I've tried. I've sat with my eyes shut for hours. He'd stood in a queue in front of the man who called him what I called him, and he'd bought a coffee off me, and he'd said nothing. The postmark was 2 months old. That's the bit I'd take out if I could. 2 months because his sister found the letter in a drawer, addressed and stamped and never sent, and she posted it after, and she wrote her own note on the back of an envelope, and hers was 3 lines, and one of them said he'd written it the day after the transcript came out and then couldn't do it. 8 years that letter sat there. And he died at 51 of something ordinary, something with a name you'd recognize, nothing to do with any of it. Nothing to do with any of it, that's what I keep saying, like I'm arguing with somebody. There's one more thing, and then I'll stop. The girl in the red coat. She wasn't there. Thursdays, that was her day, and it was a Tuesday, and I want you to have that, because I know you've been carrying her since part 1, and you shouldn't have to. She kept coming. That's the thing. For about 2 years after they reopened it, that little girl came on Thursdays with her granddad and her useless drum, and she stood in front of the north box and drummed at a 19-year-old lad who wasn't Bracken and never knew he wasn't, and the lad stared straight ahead and gave her nothing. And then she'd walk off up the path holding her granddad's hand. And I'd watch her to the corner. Every time, I still do it, and there's no girl and there's no drum and the granddad's been gone 20 years, I still watch people to the corner. My wife's noticed. She's never asked. I only worked out why about 10 years ago, standing there doing it. He didn't teach me anything. He never said a word to me, not one, not in 11 years of coffee, and I've made my peace with that. But I copied him anyway, the way you copy a limp without knowing, and now I'm 63, and I watch strangers to the corner because a man I screamed at in a burning park used to do it, and I thought he was a statue. I'd like to have told him that. I had 20 years and about 400 flat whites and a transcript and a drawer with 4 lines in it, and I never once, not one single time, said the only thing that ever needed saying, which was,